All right, so for more than 100 years, the land border between Peru and Chile well, it was a pretty big deal, a real source of tension. But once they finally got that sorted out, a whole new problem popped up, one that was maybe even trickier. Where does one country actually end and the other begin out there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean?
And look, this is not just some, abstract legal question on a map. We are talking about a huge, resource-rich chunk of the ocean. You can see right here just how far apart the two countries were. Their competing claims created this massive disputed zone. For decades, this was the heart of the conflict.
So to really get what's going on here, you have to understand the two very different claims. At its core, this whole dispute came down to history versus geography. It was about a line that one country, Chile, was convinced already existed, and another, Peru, that was absolutely certain needed to be drawn for the very first time.
And here they are, side by side. Chile's argument was honestly pretty straightforward. They said, look, the border is a straight line, a parallel of latitude that shoots out from our land border, and everybody's basically known this for years. Peru's response? Just as firm. They said, hold on, there was never a formal agreement. International law says we need a new, fair line that splits the difference, right down the middle between our coastlines.
Okay, so let's dig into Chile's side of things first. Their whole case was built on the idea that this was already a done deal, something rooted in agreements from way back in the 1950s. Chile pointed to this really key document, the 1952 Santiago Declaration. Now, their argument was that this agreement, which was all about sharing marine resources, also implicitly set their maritime boundary. And that boundary was this simple parallel line running 200 nautical miles straight out into the Pacific. As far as Chile was concerned, case closed. But you guessed it, Peru looked at the exact same history, the exact same documents, and saw a totally different story. Or maybe more accurately, they saw a lack of a story. Their whole point was that just because nobody said anything, that doesn't mean everyone agreed. So Peru's lawyers came back and said, nowhere in the Santiago Declaration does it even mention an official boundary. So they went to the International Court of Justice and asked it to do what it does best. Draw a fair line where there isn't one, using this standard tool of international law called the equidistance line.
So what exactly is an equidistance line? Well, put simply, it's just a median line. Imagine two people walking along the coast of each country. The equidistance line would be the path you'd have to walk in the ocean to always stay exactly in the middle of those two people. It's a really common way to get a fair division of maritime space. Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. The International Court of Justice basically had to become a team of legal detectives. They started digging through more than 60 years of treaties, old maps, even fishing records, all to try and find the truth. The court really zeroed in on three key moments. First, back in 1947, both countries claimed 200 nautical miles of sea, which, kind of created this problem in the first place. Then they looked at that 1952 Santiago Declaration. Here, the court actually agreed with Peru, saying, yeah, this doesn't explicitly create a border. But then, they found it, a 1954 agreement that set up a tiny tolerance zone for fishermen right near the coast. This little-known document turned out to be the smoking gun.
And this brought the court to the absolute heart of the matter. Was it possible? Could two countries agree to something as huge as a permanent international border just by their actions, even if they never ever wrote it down in a formal treaty?
The court's answer was a huge yes. The wording of that 1954 fishing agreement was everything. Think about it. To create a tolerant zone on either side of a boundary, you first have to agree that a boundary is there. It was a brilliant piece of legal deduction by the court.
This whole idea is based on a legal concept called a tacit agreement. It's basically an unspoken understanding. It's an agreement that you figure out from how people act, not from what they say directly. That 1954 agreement didn't create the boundary, but it proved that both countries were already acting as if one existed.
So this seems like a major win for Chile's argument, right? Well, not so fast. The court had solved one mystery, but it immediately cracked open a brand new one. Okay, so there was an unspoken agreement, but what were its limits? Did that understanding really go all the way out for 200 nautical miles?
And this is where the court handed down a ruling that I think surprised just about everyone. It crafted this incredibly clever and nuanced compromise that kind of blended both countries' arguments together.
The court's entire, brilliant compromise, this whole next phase of the judgment, it all hinges on just one number: 80. 80 nautical miles.
Right, so here's the logic. The court reasoned that this unspoken agreement was based on the real world of the 1950s. Since the agreement was all about fishing,
The boundary it implied could only go out as far as the fishermen of that time actually went. And based on all the evidence, that was about 80 nautical miles offshore. Beyond that point, there was no agreement. It was a blank slate.
And here it is, the final result. For the first 80 nautical miles out, the court sided with Chile, saying the boundary follows that straight line of latitude. But then, at the 80-mile mark, where that tacit agreement ended, the court sided with Peru, drawing a brand new equidistance line out to the 200-mile limit. It's like a modern version of the wisdom of Solomon, giving each side a really important piece of what it wanted. But don't for a second think this was an easy, unanimous decision. Just look at the votes. Yeah, almost everyone agreed that a boundary existed along the parallel, but the most creative parts of the verdict, stopping it at 80 miles and then switching to the equidistance line, that passed by a much tighter 10-6 vote. It just shows you how complex and divisive these questions were, even for the top legal minds in the world.
So why does a line in the ocean between two South American countries really matter to the rest of us? Well, the fallout from this judgment is actually pretty huge for international law.
You know, in the end, this wasn't really a total win or a total loss for anybody. The one thing both countries got was something they desperately needed: certainty. This ruling is just a masterclass in how international courts can balance the weight of old historical practices with modern ideas of fairness. It's a really powerful example of the law just working. It peacefully resolved a dispute that had simmered for decades and replaced all that ambiguity with a clear, final line.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thought. The court drew a real physical line in the ocean based on an unwritten 60-year-old understanding between fishermen. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other invisible lines, born from customs, from practice, from unspoken agreements, are shaping the maps of our world right now?